Hello, everyone. Good to see you. So here we are. Um, there's a famous passage of uh, the narrow road to the interior or narrow road to the deep north. Um, and Basho himself was kind of a wanderer, and he liked to wander, and he liked to do a couple of things. He liked to wander, and he wandered on foot usually, or occasionally on a horse, and uh, and mainly, and you went somewhere. You went to see a famous temple, or you went to see the full moon over your favorite bay, or you went to see sightseeing, but also you went to see friends, which is a kind of nice reason to wander or go. And then sometimes friends wouldn't be there, but he would go and they would say, "Come and stay in my house." And we still do that. I was doing that last week actually. But and there's something kind of nice about the interchange that's there in Zen and haiku. When they met with friends, they'd somebody would say a line, and then someone else would add a line to it. You know, Cormorants carrying sticks to the cormorant tree. Spring day, something like that. Just made that up. Having seen cormorants carrying sticks and have leaves hanging off them too. And there's one tree with about a couple of hundred cormorant nests in it, and a lot of noise and safety in numbers from the cormorant's point of view, I guess. But it's got an incredibly messy, stinky tree. It's wonderful. so, so cormorants carrying twigs to the cormorant, carrying sticks to the cormorant nest on a spring day. Yeah, that sort of thing. So they'd exchange poems like that, and somebody else would say something else. The the golden crowned sparrows have flown away to the far north. Different bird calls in the garden. So, so he said, "This life is a journey. We travel in sleep and dream." He didn't say it, I said that. "We travel to work, to find rest, to find love. When we die, we are thought to go into the bardos. We go into different realms, the way we do in dreams. When we dream, we travel like that." And this too is a journey. And one of the things about the journey is you forget who you were when you weren't on the journey, which is kind of one of the Zen qualities about being on a journey, right? Um, takes a long time to forget who you are, or at least some miles. And so Basho did say, "The moon and sun are travelers in eternity, even the years wander on. A lifetime adrift in a boat, or leading a tired horse into the years. Each day is a journey, and the journey itself is home. From the earliest times there have been those who perished on the road. Still I have always been drawn by wind-blown clouds, and dream of a lifetime of wandering. Coming home from a year's walking tour of the coast last autumn, I swept the cobwebs from my hut on the banks of the Sumida just in time for New Year. But by the time spring mists began to rise from the fields, I longed to cross the Shirakawa barrier into the northern wilds, to the northern interior." So he's just home for a month, basically, and after a year's traveling, he wants to go off again. And drawn by the wanderer spirit Dosagen, I'll say about Dosagen in a minute, I couldn't concentrate on things. Mending my cotton pants, sewing a new strap on my bamboo hat, I daydreamed, rubbing moxa into my legs to strengthen them. I dreamed a bright moon rising over Matsushima, famous beauty spot with islands in a bay. I put my hat, I placed my house, which is, his house was about like, I don't know, really tiny. I placed my house in another's hands and moved to my patron, Mr. Sampu's summer house, in preparation for my journey. I left a verse by my door. Even this grass hut may be transformed into a doll's house. And then I started. Those who remain behind watch the shadow of the traveller's back disappear. I want to say something. Dosajin is a sort of Japanese traveller god, Shinto god by the wayside. You're sometimes seen as a couple, sometimes just a solitary person, sometimes just poles by the wayside, but usually often as a couple or a solitary person or a monk. But when it's a couple, often they're kind of doing something sexual together. They're roadside shrines. So Dosajin was also a fertility kind of god. Some of the but here's what the Buddhists assimilated him to: Jizo or Kashitagarbha, who's the god of travelers and god of the bodhisattva of the underworld. He's a very beat up. This is a traveling shrine. See, it belonged to a priest, and bits of it. There would have been a staff in in one of the hands, and probably a bell or something in the other. So I think one of them was there, but I used it as a traveling shrine myself, and it got knocked about. Traveling to Sesshin with me over many years. And now it lives on Alison Atwell's altar, actually. Yeah. And there's a deep interiority about the figure, because Jizo is the guide to the underworld and the guide for children, and also the guide when children have been lost. Jizo is the person to guide them in the next life, So that's Dosajin, the traveler spirit. So I've been thinking how much it's a human thing. It's pretty sure we came out of Africa, but we went everywhere as soon as we possibly could as human beings. And all along the Pacific Rim, and I've seen stone tools like 40,000 years old in sand dunes in Australia, and there were and we made carvings as human beings. We did everything, and also I think in a way when we travel, we participate in the world. We become the world. To become the world, when we see something, we become it. And koan, that's a big thing in meditation. When you see the tree, you become partly tree. You see the child, you laugh and run. You see someone sad, that touches you. You become that, and in a way that diminishes the sadness, really, because we participate in it together. We participate in life together with each other. So we're not always trying to fix things, we're in them, we're sharing them. And so one of the things about Zen is to let life have us, let life touch us and penetrate us and go into our hearts. And so really, really to feel it. And that's a noble thing. The first part of Zen is to understand this kind of an eternal quality in living, that we can actually detect and participate in and be touched by and seized by, often symbolized by everything being equal, or sort of like a snowfield, everything being cool like moonlight. And so that's a beautiful thing. And to know about that seems to be the fundamental thing in Zen. You know, that you thought something was tremendously important and you meditate, and that injury or that sorrow is not so important. And also that gives you a kind of power, because you don't have to say yes to everything. You can say no. Or you don't have to say, you don't have to hide from things. You can participate in the difficulties of the world. So that's the next thing after the awakening, the simplicity and the sameness and everything being in a way equal. The true person having no rank, Linji says. Then you can go wandering and feel all the different aspects of the world. The soul wanders, the heart wanders. You can have leadership, you can have all sorts of things like that. So there's a couple of things in our tradition about, this is T.S. Eliot, famous thing. We shall not cease from exploration. The end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. The end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. He has a thing to it, it's not in this piece here, but how it's as if we're following the sound of a bird through a thick garden. You know, we get called by the universe like that. Through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of a tree. And here's a famous Western thing. For a long time, I went to bed at the beginning of a journey, you know. For a long time, I went to bed early, sometimes my candle scarcely out. My eyes would close so quickly, I did not have time to say to myself, I'm falling asleep. And half an hour later, the thought that it was time to try to sleep would wake me. I wanted to put down the book I thought I still had in my hands and blow out my light. I had not ceased while sleeping to form reflections on what I had just read, but these reflections had taken a rather peculiar turn. It seemed to me that I myself was what the book was talking about. At church, a quartet, the rivalry between Francois I and Charles V. This belief lived on for a few seconds upon my waking. That's a very meditation thing. Am I dreaming? Am I meditating? Am I awake? Hard to tell. And here's another great one. That when you set off on a journey, you also find things you weren't expecting to find, right? I mean, that's the point of the journey, to find something you weren't expecting to find. And so I just picked up Moby Dick last night, which I haven't read for years. Alison reads it about once every year or something, but it's really great because Ishmael, he calls himself Ishmael, the character, and he says, when I get so disturbed that it requires the strongest discipline not to jump into the street and knock everybody's hat off as they're passing. So he gets so sick of civilization, sick of standing still. He wants to go on a sea voyage. So he picks a whaling ship to go on a sea voyage, which is a pretty radical thing. And he goes to an inn, and they say, well, there's a harpooner is out at the moment, and he's not... he hasn't come in yet, but, you know, he's a nice fellow and you can share his bed. You know, people often share beds in inns, so that's the only bed I have. I have one inn with one bed for two with one person already in it. And so he agrees, and what's he doing? He's out selling heads. Selling heads. Oh, he's selling his head. What do you mean he's selling his head? Well, he has a head left to sell. And so he bought from Tahiti or somewhere a lot of shrunken heads that he's now selling in the pubs in New Bedford. And this, he found this a bit disturbing. I thought, well, I'm very tired, and and the and so then the man comes in. He turned around. Good heavens, what a sight! Such a face! It was of a dark purplish colour, yellow colour, here and there stuck over with large blackish-looking squares. Yes, it's just as I thought. He's a terrible bedfellow. He's been in a fight, got dreadfully cut, and here he is just from the surgeon. So this is all going through the main character's mind. But in that moment, he chanced to turn his face towards the light, so they could not be sticking plasters at all, these black squares on his cheeks. They were stains of some sort or other. First I knew not what to make of this, but soon an inkling of the truth occurred to me. I remembered a story of a whale man, who falling among the cannibals had been tattooed by them. And I concluded this harpooner in the course of his different voyages must have met with a similar adventure. And what is it? Thought I, after all, it's only his outside. A man can be honest in any sort of skin. But then, what to make of his unearthly complexion? That part of it, I mean, lying round about and completely independent of the squares of tattooing. To be sure, it might be nothing, but anyway. So it goes. I'm going to jump a bit here. Having opened his bag with some sort of difficulty, he pulled out a tomahawk and a sealskin wallet with the hair on. Placing these on the old chests in the middle of the room, he then took the New Zealand head, a ghostly thing enough, and crammed it down into the bag. They now took off his hat, a new beaver hat. There was no hair on his head, none to speak of, nothing but a small scalp knot twisted up on his forehead. Had not the stranger stood between me and the door, I would have bolted out of it quicker than ever I bolted to dinner. Even as it was, I thought something of slipping out the window, but it was a second floor back. What to make of this head peddling purple rascal altogether passed my comprehension. Ignorance is the parent of fear, and feeling completely nonplussed and confounded about the stranger, I confess I was now as much afraid of him as if it was the devil himself who had broken in my room in the dead of night. In fact, I was so afraid of him I was not game enough just then to address him and command a satisfactory answer concerning what seemed inexplicable in him. Meanwhile, he continued the business of undressing, and at last showed his chest and arms. These covered parts of him were checkered with the same small squares as his face. His back, too, was all over the same dark squares. Still more, his very legs were marked, as if a parcel of dark green frogs were running up the trunks of young palms. And plus his peddling heads, he might take a fancy to mine. Heavens, look at that tomahawk. There was no time for shuddering, for now he went about something that completely fascinated my attention. Going into his heavy wrap-all, which he had previously hung on a chair, he fumbled in the pockets and produced at length a curious little deformed image with a hunch on its back, exactly the colour of a 3-days-old baby. Remembering the embalmed head, at first I thought this black mannequin was a real baby, preserved in a similar manner, but seeing that all was not all limber and it glistened a good deal like polished ebony, I concluded it must be nothing but a wooden idol, which indeed it proved to be. For now he goes up to the empty fireplace, removing the papered fireboard, sets up this little hunchbacked image like a tenpin between the andirons. The chimney jambs and all the bricks inside were very sooty, so I thought this fireplace made a very appropriate little shrine. And then he took his tomahawk up from the table, examined the head of it, and then holding a light to it with his mouth at the handle, he puffed out great clouds of tobacco smoke. The next moment the light was extinguished. This wild cannibal, tomahawk between his teeth, sprang into bed with me. I sang out. I could not help it now, and giving a sudden grunt of astonishment, he began feeling me. He didn't know there was anyone there either. I, is, who the devil you? You know, speak, I kill you. So saying, the lighted tomahawk began flourishing above me in the dark. Landlord, for God's sake, Peter Coffin is the name of the landlord, by the way. Peter Coffin. Landlord, watch, Coffin, angel, save me. Speaky, tell me who he be, or damn me, I kill ye, growled the cannibal, while his horrid flourishings of the tomahawk scattered the hot tobacco ashes about me till I thought my linen would get on fire. But the landlord came rushing in. Don't be afraid now, he said. Queequeg, here wouldn't harm a hair of your head. Stop your grinning, shouted I, and why didn't you tell me that harpooner was a cannibal? I thought you knowed it. Didn't I tell you he was peddling heads around town? so sort of when you leave home, each day is a journey, and the journey is home, you meet different kinds of people. And you getting in, he afterwards explained, he said, motioning to me with his tomahawk, throwing the clothes to one side. He really did this not only in a civil, but a really kind and charitable way. I stood looking at him for a moment. For all his tattooings, he was on the whole a clean, comely-looking cannibal. And what's all this fuss I've been making about, thought I to myself. The man's a human being, just as I am. He's just as much reason to fear me as I have to be afraid of him. Better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. Good night, landlord, I said. You may go. I turned in and never slept better in my life. So Queequeg turns about, gets him on a ship, turns to be his guide, and Queequeg is a fabulously valued person because he's an incredible harpooner, and so he gets he's rich in whale ship terms, but Queequeg talks him into signing on Ishmael. Anyway, you know the story, but it's a wonderful story. And so that you get into worlds you hadn't planned, like Proust sort of falling asleep and then being inside his own book. Or Alice in Wonderland, she's there and then she sees a white rabbit run past and she follows the white rabbit. That's the beginning of a journey. And then she falls down a hole and there are shelves in the hole. And one of them says marmalade and she takes a look at it and then she puts it back on another shelf as she keeps falling. So each day is a journey, and the journey itself is home. And wherever you are, it's just really, in a way, how is it different? You're with Basho in a hut somewhere, a bamboo hut maybe, or with a thatch roof. Or perhaps you're, with a young boy reading books and falling and believing he's inside the book as he falls asleep. Or perhaps you're somebody who's kind of down and out and is looking for work, and he has the odd idea of going and signing on a whaling ship. So maybe you're all of those people. Yeah. And all the times you've said, well, I'll go and get a new job. That's a journey. Yeah. I'll go and get a new love. That's a journey. I'll stay in the life I have. That's a journey too, also unpredictable. So I want to read you a couple of other things that are like this, because the thing about a journey is when you take it, you meet people you never expected to. And the thing about meditation is you'll meet someone you never expected to, who is you. And also that forgetting the self thing happens, and we stop worrying about the terrible things somebody did and how they let me down or betrayed me or things like that. And I don't know. It seems a lot of work to talk about, to think about that. Here's Odysseus, who's somebody who didn't want to set off on a journey, but he got captured and forced to be a soldier for the great king Agamemnon. And And so I left the ship, and then he heard his men had been captured. They'd gone into Circe's palace and not come back. Somebody was cautious and stayed behind and watched, and didn't come back. But then, so he left the ship, put on his sword, buckled on his sword with silver. I will go, he said. His men said, you can't go. Something really dangerous happened. The men went here and disappeared. I left the ship and shore. I must go. I have to do this, he said. So that's one of those things sometimes you're on a journey. I must go. I have to do this. Yeah, that's a kind of great thing, isn't it? Maybe you have to make an artwork. I must do. I must go. I have to do this. Yeah. Maybe someone you love wants something from you and you say, no, I have to have it myself, or things like that. Or maybe you give somebody something. It's like that. I walked on up, crossing the sacred glades, and almost reached the great house of the enchantress Circe, when I met Hermes carrying his wand of gold. He's the Jizo of the Greek world. He can go into the underworld and above ground and everything. He seemed like an adolescent boy, really cute, when fields first start to grow. He took my hand and said, why have you come across these hills alone? You do not know this place, poor man. Your men were turned to pigs in Circe's house and crammed in pens. Do you imagine you can set them free? You cannot. If you try that, you will not get back home. You will stay here with them. But I can help you. He does that thing of do not do it, but actually if you're determined to do it, I'll help. Which is one of those nice things when you get somebody on a take this antidote to keep you safe when you go into Circe's house. Now I will tell you all her lethal spells and tricks. She'll make you a potion mixed with poison. Its magic will not work on you because you have the herb I gave you. When she strikes you with a long wand, draw your sharpened sword, rush to her as if you meant to kill her. She will be frightened of you and will tell you to sleep with her. Do not hold out against her. She is a goddess. Goddess tells you got to sleep with her. You got to sleep with her. Do not argue with her. If you sleep with her, she'll set your friends and save yourself. Tell her to swear an oath by all the gods she will not plot further harm for you, or while you have your clothes off, she may hurt you, unmanning you. And so bright mercurial god pulled from the ground a plant and showed me how the root is black, its flower is white as milk. The gods call this plant moly. It's hard for mortal men to dig it up, but gods are able to do anything. So that was another unexpected journey. And the Odyssey is full of journeys into the underworld, journeys of, into the enemy camp, journeys of flight, journeys out of slavery, journeys into slavery, all that. So, I don't know, I just thought of, taking a road trip is, such an American thing, don't you think? American road trips are intrinsically more interesting than other road trips, in my view. It's like driving across. When I first came here, I remember driving across Arizona, the northern part of Arizona, through the mesas and the Hopi villages and the Navajo places, absolutely stunning places, and really interesting people, and all very different from each other. And realizing, also this is very old land, the old Anasazi ruins with shards of pottery from 1,000 years ago there, and how it opens you up when you do that, And then down in Tucson, which is a place I worked in for quite a while, there's a shrine. It's near the conference center, but nobody would ever find it. And it was when I first saw it, it was just a bit of a vacant lot and some like rusty iron and things like that. But it's a shrine for the desperados and people who've been murdered or have murdered somebody and been murdered for murdering somebody, or been murdered for running off with someone's wife or something. And I was very touched that there was a shrine for the people there was no shrine for, who could not be buried in consecrated ground. It seemed a very sort of interesting American sort of idea, really, in a way. Certainly a indigenous idea. And when you go there, there are little bits of, now it's been cleaned up a bit. When I went there at first, you thought you probably, I better watch my back or I might end up here myself. And but now it's sort of kind of more salubrious, and it was so black from candles being burned and things, and you'd pull out a little bit of paper and read it. People would write a message on the paper and stick it. The old adobe bricks were, I don't know, looks like maybe late 19th century or something. All the mortar was wearing out and things. People would, in the holes, people would stick bits of paper. If you pull one out, it said something, for my brother who is dead now, and things like that. And that was very touching. So that sort of thing. That's what you find when you travel. Just like Jesus would lead you there. Or there's a big Baroque cathedral down south of Tucson that's a traveling. Just felt it was a sort of place though. When the Franciscan friars came up and, built their little cathedrals and missions and things, then this one was great. When I first walked in, there was a life-size effigy of Judas hanging from the ceiling, which seemed like these people don't mind bringing suffering into the middle of life, And then there was a little three-quarter life-size figure of the founder, and if you wanted something, you prayed for, would my back get better, or will my child get better, or whatever, and you put a little cord, and his arm lifted up and blessed you. And it's the magic of life. When you travel, you see the magic of life. And I always visit that place if I'm anywhere near Tucson. But the great temples in Japan, there are the gardens, that have been done for hundreds and hundreds of years. People kept the garden, just growing it, and monks spending their whole life on a particular stretch of garden, and then and people having died over the gardens because they pissed the shogun off about the way they did something, and so that now they're buried nearby. So that when you travel, each moment you're in is eternal. Like right now, if you look in right now, what you're feeling and thinking, that's the rest of your life. That is your life, right now. I'm with you. I've chosen to spend the rest of my life with you. So it's kind of nice, isn't it? Wherever we are now, it's eternal. So here we are. And isn't that wonderful? As long as you're just here, it's good enough. They used to say it has Buddha nature. Tess Beasley, you want to say anything?
Had so much could say about traveling, but the two things that were really sitting with me as we were meditating was the first is that I always think it's interesting, almost always when I leave for a trip, I have some sort of crying on the way to the airport. And it's not usually in response to something. It's not even about anything specific, but that feeling of leaving, just that I'm leaving my life in some way right now, and that I don't know. There's often like a visceral sense almost of letting go of something and entering something else. And I can just, and particularly if I'm like by myself driving to the airport, and I usually have a long drive to the airport, there's just the feeling of departure is such an intense, and both that unhooking and kind of leaving and almost a kind of death in it, but also then this I don't know, the sense of possibility and uncertainty that like is the same kind of visceral opening that happens, and how, as you were reading some of those stories, the thing I'm always struck by, no matter where I've been, is how utterly unprepared I am for the visceral experience of a place. Like whether I just go to New York City and I sort of encounter the place, or whether I'm going someplace very far, it's almost like being in retreat. And when each person comes to see me, there's this encounter of a place or a new experience that happens. And and no matter how many times I've been someplace, I'm never prepared for whatever that is. And I like that. And there's always this is sort of just an amusing part of my psyche, I think, but whenever I go someplace, I always notice I'm trying it on. Like the first, 2 or 3 days, like I could live here, and I start imagining sort of what it might be like. And then there's always this point at which, I don't know, about 3 days in, maybe it is kind of a session thing. It's like wherever I'm coming from and wherever I am have to sort of mingle inside me. And then I think, well, I don't know, maybe I could live here. Maybe I miss where I'm coming from. Then I just think maybe it doesn't matter where I am, you know? And I guess the last thing maybe I'll say, I was thinking when I was listening to Michael play during the meditation, one of the strangest, most surprising travel encounters I ever had was in Cape Town. We went to see my partner's ex-husband, which was already an adventure by itself, because he was living there for a little while, and he decided to take us to the townships. And because he was connected to some people there, he was supporting some of the the youth. And these four young people who had started a choir to keep the kids out of gangs during the day. So they would get together, like 70 of them, and just sing to stay out of trouble. And they invited us into their home, and the wallpaper's peeling, and kids are covered with bandages, and like, I mean, it was quite a scene already. But when these kids started singing together, I just started weeping. And they sang for us for, I don't know, an hour or so. We just hung out with them and drank tea and sang, and um, felt their lives and kind of felt our lives with them. And as we were driving back, someone had been killed by the time we had gone there and come back. There was a body in the street. And yet you feel oh, it was just this very raw feeling of both being very distant from something and very connected to something, and it all being kind of human. And that just feels a lot like travel to me. So that's it.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. John Joseph, do you want to have anything you want to say? Journeys, coming and going.
Yeah, you were talking about. I love the Moby Dick segment you read, and you're talking about books and journeys. And I just finished a book I really loved this morning. It's called "Just Kids" by Patti Smith, the poet and the rock musician. Anyway, it's about a 20-year journey with her lover and then deepest friend, Robert Mapplethorpe. And they start out and they meet just by chance, and they're almost homeless, and they only have enough money living in New York to afford a donut. So they split the donut like once a day, and then they go forward, and he starts, his life gets more and more dark, and he starts turning tricks in Times Square to make the rent, and she continues to work as a publisher, and so their journey starts to diverge, and he goes on and becomes a famous photographer, and she becomes a rock singer and poet. But what made me think about why did she stay? Why did she sit in the lobby of the Chelsea Hotel, waiting for him night after night to return from Times Square? And why did she stay with him for as deep as friends for 20, 25 years? And I realize is because of her completely unconditional love for him. If she had conditions, sort of like you were mentioning, John, if she had conditions, if she knew what a deep friendship should be and a love ship should be, she wouldn't have stayed with him. But she remained open and supportive until he died in 1989 of AIDS. But it's just a lovely, lovely story. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Alison Atwell, are you around? I don't know if you. Yes, you are.
Here I am. I was very struck with your story of Basho, how he would have gone traveling for an entire year and completely worn out, and then he'd be home. He'd be home only for 4 weeks, and he'd begin to be full of longing for travel again. And so I was wondering about that longing that we have for. Tess was talking about this, a kind of openness that comes with after the departure. And there's something you said during the meditation, forgetting ourselves. I think that's a lot of when I think about my own setting off on travels, and I was thinking about, the backpacking trips that I would take in my early 20s, teens, 20s, 30s. And part of it is that when you're up there in the wilderness, you're not who you have none of the trappings of your former life. There's no identifying features. So there's no possibility of ranking, everyone's dirty. Everyone's got only a backpack and nothing else. It's very hard to impress someone with your backpack. And and uh and then and then it also made me think about last week when John and we were in Santa Barbara, and I took him to the old mission, which is one of the oldest buildings in Santa Barbara. It's like from the 1700s or something. And we were in the church, which was had this magnificent handmade quality, because it was made by the Chumash who had been rounded up by the friars. And it's got this and it smells of frankincense and myrrh, which is the familiar fragrance from my childhood from the Catholic churches. And every Catholic church, if you're in Italy or France or in Santa Barbara, they all have that marvelous fragrance. Anyway, we were in the church for a while, just enjoying it. There's just no one around, no one's hanging out at the church, and we go out of the church into the graveyard, which is right there, and we're sort of looking around, and then I hear what I think is singing, but it's I'm not sure. It sounds like a live voice. So I go back and look in the church door, and there is a woman who we had spoken with wandering around the church. She was just some like tourist looking average person, kind of frumpy looking and middle-aged, not very remarkable that you wouldn't remember her physicality. But she had been in the church by herself. There was no one else in there. And suddenly she broke into this song. I think she was singing in, I don't know, it was a language I didn't recognize. But this voice that was so clear, she must have been a professional singer, I imagine. The voice was just filling the church. And it just, this heart-stopping beauty. And travel allows something like that. There's no one around that and you can become larger than yourself or someone other than yourself. For a moment, you're singing directly to the to God. in the church. It's really fantastic. So yes, we're not ourselves.
Mhm.
Long, long ago, when the land was very young, Payodinme walked for a long, long time along the white part of the Milky Way. It took a long, long time until he reached the small island at the bottom of the ocean called Trawina. Trawina is the indigenous name for Tasmania. When he arrived at Trawina, he went down to the sea. And Trawina had fallen to the bottom of the Milky Way, and that's how come it was at the bottom of the sea of stars. One of the things I notice about being here in the middle of the journey, when we're in the journey, it doesn't matter where the journey is going in a way. If we're really succeeding and you're getting all these awards, or if we're really, if things are just pretty much as they are, or you're really sick, or whatever it is, we're free. And as far as I can tell, what we do is we hold morning temple so that people can have that experience of freedom enough that it starts to saturate them, and they stop thinking it's something they have to manipulate or work hard at or something like that. So it just comes over us, you know. And that's really what life does. It just comes to us. It comes and meets us. So it's a nice, thank you. It changes us when we do this together. I'm going to ask George Foy if he's got anything to say.
I don't know where to start this. There's so much. I remember talking to a professor of microbiology who told me that the one thing that all living beings had in common was not converting energy into sugars or procreation. It was moving. It was movement. All else living things do is move, and movement implies leaving a place that presumably you think you know, to go somewhere that intrinsically is somewhere you don't know everything about, and quite often is someplace that you're lost in. That's the essence of navigation: is not knowing where you are. It's not knowing. It's that not knowing is truly very very intimate. And what Tess was saying about feeling tears when you set off on a long journey, I think it's so clearly because it's the very essence of life, which of course includes death. It includes traveling on to somewhere that we were not aware of, which is why I know in my case, and I think in other people's case also, when I go on a long trip, I literally set my affairs in order. I try to pay my bills and make sure that people know where I'm going, that I've got my passport and so forth. And so that, you know, if I disappear into the underworld, people will have an idea that where I've gone. And I love that you brought up Odysseus, because to my mind, Odysseus was of course, the Odyssey is entirely about him trying to get home, but he's also such a bullshitter that I'm convinced that half the time he really didn't want to go home to, you know, boring old Penelope and her loom in Ithaca. He was quite happy just carrying on, and especially when he got to Calypso's island. I mean, that place was really fantastic. And I think we're terrified of traveling because of what could happen. Even going to the supermarket, we might get hit by a car, or we might see something fantastic, a hawk stooping on a rabbit, and we might die. We will certainly arrive someplace that we didn't quite expect. And finally, just try to be really quick, but the Queequeg story, which I love, reminds me of being on one of those European couchettes, and where there's 3 bunks on each side of a train compartment, and you don't know who you're going to end up with. And I got on one in Milan, and in the middle of the night, we stopped in Venice, and there'd been nobody in my whole compartment. And somebody came in and knocked against me, and in a very sweet, soft voice excused herself no idea who she was. And she got into an opposite bunk, and we started talking. And it was the most otherworldly experience. I had no idea who she was. She had no idea who I was. And we kept talking about anything and everything. It was one of the most intimate things I've ever had. We didn't know where we were. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know who each other was. And yet it was incredibly intimate. And I have 1,000 more things to say, but I think that's enough. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Oh, wonderful, isn't it? I like that, the intimacy of the darkness. We've only got a short time, but I want to bring Angela Ruckles' voice in from far Tasmania, Tarrant.
Right. Yeah. Well, just sitting in the dark, I'm remembering the feeling of journeys beginning before daylight, and just that sense of expectancy and uncertainty and excitement of the darkness, and not knowing where the daylight will appear, how the daylight and the journey will intersect. So that's all.
Thank you. It's lovely to see how dark it is and before dawn. Thank you, everyone. It's marvelous to be together. This moment of pause in our journey.